Well, first off, good afternoon to everybody. I know we just had a big lunch, and I'll try to keep it interesting. I won't, apply something in the Army. It's called death by PowerPoint.
No worries.
I will try to avoid that, definitely. First off, I would start with a message from President Jimmy Morales. He asked me to deliver a quick message to everybody, just to remind everybody and assure you that Guatemala is and remains a partner and an associate country of the United States. We will together keep fighting the good fight in trying to counter all these different threat networks, common enemies, common problems, and whatever the press might say, there are results that the U.S. government and different agencies know that Guatemala is doing and achieving with the help of the U.S. and all its different agencies. What I'm going to talk about, I'm going to separate it in a few different topics. I'm going to talk a little bit about drug trafficking, gangs, MS-13 and Barrio 18. We're going to talk also about the different human trafficking organizations and all the connects crimes that float around that specifically. A little bit about terrorism and how that is starting to become an issue in the Northern Triangle and the Central American region. And then I'm going to throw a little bit of some food for thought. And it's basically talking about covert political influence that's going on right now in Latin America, specifically from a specific ideology, and how that is almost becoming a criminal network in itself. Because we're seeing funds coming from different sources, not only from state actors, but also from criminal organizations such as cartels, etc., etc. Right, so really quickly, as you may see here, transnational threat networks have shown to have dynamic capabilities and logistics, specifically drug cartels. What you can see here is an effect that we see in Guatemala, most part of the Northern Triangle, is that we are simply the middleman in the cocaine route from South America to North America and Europe. What we have right now in the market is basically an oversupply of cocaine. It's flowing, it's all over the place. And the issue here is that it's almost, it's cost ineffective for the cartels to push the drugs all the way through to the United States. So what's happening is that a lot of those cargo and a lot of that cocaine is waiting in our countries for the prices to spike up, so they decide to push it up. So it's becoming really a problem for the cartels also, because they have to manage all those warehouses, illegal warehouses, and all the structures required to actually keep that cocaine safe in all these different countries as they are en route to the United States. We have different maritime routes and the different types of transportation they use. Now, with drug trafficking, and when you were talking about asymmetry, we have something called inverted asymmetry. Because of the amount of money cartels have right now and have had for a long time, most of our governments, especially the ones in smaller countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, has come to a place where these cartels have more capabilities than the government itself. What are we talking about? We have problems, for instance, in Guatemala with communications, with tactical communications for our security forces. And then we find these cartels, and they have tactical radios, tactical comms that go all the way from New Mexico and Texas, all the way down to Panama, Colombia, and they are just, clicking and communicating throughout the region. Well, our countries don't have that. We have we have had firefights where they have in this case, weaponry and more firepower than our forces. However, still we have been able to dismantle most of the big cartels in Guatemala, which has led to a phenomenon called atomization. So we don't have 2, 3, 4 big cartels operating in Guatemala, but we have smaller groups now that don't have an actual real big leader, which is different people trying to become the new big drug boss. As successful as we have been days, and especially with all the assistance with the U.S., Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador, the problem persists. And again, it comes to point and talking about the oversupply of cocaine. And I think the Honorable Congresswoman of Colombia could talk about that later as well. All these problems that also stem from political bad decisions all over the region. This is a little bit of our results. Just as you can see here, during the tenure of President Morales, the amount of seizures, cocaine seizures we have had, and they're up. We're talking about billions of dollars. Okay, with very little cooperation, the programs that the United States has in Guatemala are not as big as what they have in Mexico and Colombia and other countries. But we right now are the ones that hold the records for cocaine seized in the entire American region or the Western Hemisphere. Some of opium eradication as well. Again, you can see this year we actually had to conduct a special operation in the western parts of Guatemala, in San Marcos and Huehuetenango, that pretty much was a denied area for the security forces. Basically, the cartels had taken over those areas, and they had all the citizenry there kidnapped, pretty much. So they were working for them. They were maintaining poppy plantation for them, and we finally decided that we needed to do something more direct, a direct approach, direct action, and we liberated these areas. And now the next step is actually to bring development to these areas. But again, it's a little bit slower process, but it needs to be done. And the simple fact is that, let me put you in context with a little bit of history. After the peace accords were signed in Guatemala, one of the conditions put up by the guerrilla was that all the military zones, which basically are huge military bases, had to be demobilized, dismantled, and removed from our different states. What that created is basically a lack of power, of an emptiness of authority. So the next regular step was just a criminal organization came up and took over those different towns and different places. So now we have to recover all that capacity, all that state capacity that has been lost for almost 30 years. These are more of the captures we have had and all the different drug systems we have. Some of the risks that we face, and what I want to bring about this is that some of the best strategies that we have found that are successful in the region is basically, like you said, combat and fight a network with another network. Guatemala has led this effort in creating all these different groups and working groups. Specifically, I'll talk about three specific examples. One is the GANSECs. It's Grupos de Alto Nivel de Seguridad, or high-level security groups, where with different countries we come to these multilateral or bilateral accords to actually share information, but also coordinate specific operations against cartels. This is how different people were captured. Just to give you an example, former governor of Mexico, Javier Duarte, nothing to do with me, by the way. That's through GANSEC that we had with Mexico, and the sharing of information and active information is how we actually managed to capture him. We also have similar accords with Honduras and El Salvador, and I'm proud of this. Actually, the next point. The idea to form a trinational task force, security task force, was actually born in my agency with the help of Honduras and El Salvador, my counterparts there. The idea was to have these task forces led by intelligence, not in the sense tactically led, but making sure that the intelligence was flowing constantly to these people, making sure that we were sharing what they needed to make captures, to locate people, to locate targets, and we have been very successful at that. Beyond that, we also the third network that we have built, or was already built when I was there but wasn't active, is the different networks we have with the different intelligence agencies in the region. Specifically, we have three of them. One is called FOSI. It's a network of intelligence agencies that we have with Central America and South America and Spain. Then we have COINCA, which is only Central America, and then we have COICEPEM, which is another one we have with Central America, Spain, and Mexico. Again, these networks have been very successful in actually sharing information, sharing intelligence. We have built enough confidence for all these countries to actually send us, targets and targeted information so we can find all these people of interest, and maybe not necessarily help them in conducting arrests, but definitely locating them, seeing what type of networks they are building in our countries, and again trying to dismantle all these different groups that obviously pose a threat to the entire region. Now, when we talk about gangs, the United States has declared an open war against these groups. Probably, if I may, I think we all, the entire region, and I'm not talking about only Central America and parts of Latin America, but the entire Western Hemisphere needs to be worried about this phenomenon. Gangs are simply invasive, destructive, and they can become really not a migraine, as we were talking earlier today, but a real cancer in our societies, to the point where it destroys the fabric of our cultures. We are seeing all these different influences in Guatemala from Mexico, from different parts of South America. We're seeing now, for a while now, whenever there are captures, we can find all these, things dedicated to the Santa Muerte, this cult in Mexico. Then we have found voodoo priests and whatever in the middle of all these things. Now we're talking about a conservative region as well. So all these things start, chipping off of our, like I said, of our fabric, and at some point you start losing the next generation. And we're talking about our children. At this point, it's not so much the work that has to be done from the security and intelligence part in trying to target the leaders, capture them, dismantling the leadership of these organizations. We also have to work at the base level, deny them all that population of young children. In this case, then we're talking about collaboration and cooperation, development of all these countries. You have to remember that when there is a lack of development, in this case, like in the Northern Triangle, all these children really have no opportunities. Not all of them have the chance to, in this case, migrate to the United States, which is really one of the things they aspire to. Just go to the U.S., get a green card, have a better life. And personally, I believe that if you give a young person, two options, a good one and a bad one, they'll tend to go to the good. They'll prefer a good life, an honest life, than actually getting to the a crime life. However, they don't have that good opportunity right now. They basically survive. They don't have no other options. In this case, these gangs have been working that basically they aim at their hearts and minds of these people. They offer them a family, a huge family, riches, power, which pretty much right now it's not that difficult to see. They are as powerful as actually hitting the national police and almost any government employee whenever they want. They have no limits in access to firepower, no limit in access to influence. They can buy any will that they want, and they are not necessarily that big. However, they really are all over the place, from Los Angeles, California, Texas, Chicago, even here in Washington, all the way down to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, starting to trickling down into South America. Good or bad, I know I'm not necessarily, different opinions on Nicaragua, but one of the good things about having a very strong police state like in Nicaragua is that they are not allowing these guys to grow roots in that area. But that's the only positive things about that. I'm not going to say any more about that. But it has allowed the gang phenomenon not to go as strong into Panama and Costa Rica and the rest of South America. But you have seen in Argentina, I think, they already did a couple captures of MS-13 members. And my only advice to South American countries is just make sure you get them from the beginning. Because if they grow roots, if they grow a base, it will become almost impossible to get rid of them. This is more or less the description of how these gangs operate. They are very violent. They work on things like extortion, contract killing, drug dealing, money laundering. here the issue here with money laundering and drug trafficking is that they are becoming so powerful. They have so much availability of cash. Like I said, now they have the ability to send people to college, put them in good jobs. We know for a fact that MS-13, which is of the two gangs the most sophisticated one, they have put people in banks working as tellers, working as agency managers, and that's where they start all these schemes to launder money and do other things. All right. Some of the ideas that we have talked about, like I said, and when it comes to gangs, it's basically we have to prevent them from recruiting more kids. And that's their base, children. Most of the leadership, which is above 18 years of age, all of them are, for the most part, in prison. And our prison system almost becomes a center of operations for them. They're safe, they're well kept, not necessarily well fed, but they freely operate from there. And now we have a problem also with, even with our laws, where you have all these children actually killing people, and we cannot judge them as adults. So what do we do with that? So we have to keep also constantly evolving our legal capacity to actually also make sure that these guys receive the necessary attention, not only from the legal aspect, but also from the human aspect. Talking also about how are we going to deal with all these kids that are mostly, they run away from home, or they are abandoned by their families, they have nowhere to go. So who is going to take care of them? And talking about networks, in this case, most of the people will say, well, the government has to take care of them. Yeah, but the governments can only do so much. But this is where private enterprises come in, churches come in, NGOs come in, a network that really helps in giving all these kids, all these children, new opportunities. Now, we also need to talk about threat containment. Then I go back to the same thing we did with drug trafficking. All these cooperations between countries, between agencies, where we share information, we share targeting, and we capture these guys, put them in jail, whatever they are, wherever they might be. We also need to explore all these different legal situations to make sure that, in the case of the United States, if they are going to deport a person that was captured, committing a crime, and identified as a gang member, making sure that the country that's going to receive them also accepts the charges against this person. Challenges that we have to face as a region as well. And finally, penitentiary reform. Our countries in Latin America, for the most part, policy mistakes and obviously acts of corruption, a lot of this infrastructure has been abandoned. Salvador and Honduras have taken great steps into developing maximum security prisons. Guatemala is working into it. We're working with partners. We're working with the U.S. We're working with Dominican Republic into building our own infrastructure of highly secure maximum security prisons, just to make sure we can hold these people in there and make sure they don't keep being a bad influence in our country. Human trafficking. Again, this is only, for the most part, a connected crime of drug trafficking. They just evolve and into different modes of business for them. Guatemala being just basically a natural route to the United States, it becomes a bottleneck for human trafficking. Most people that eventually want to get to the U.S. as irregular immigrants have to come through Guatemala, be it from South America, being from the Caribbean, even from Europe, even from the Middle East, which will lead me into terrorism and our counterterrorism efforts. Now we're talking about also the abuse of all these people, because it's not only about human trafficking for the purpose of bringing people to the United States. We're talking about prostitution, sexual abuse, slave work, etc., etc., and for the most part for all these cartels. Again, in this case, we're talking about more integrated global solutions when it comes to countries, bringing development, bringing options for these people, making sure that they don't get close to the cartels, making sure they don't get to these coyotes, which are what we call the people, the organizers of these trains that bring people to the north. And also sharing of information again. Identifying the leadership, identifying the structures, identifying their sources of money is also a big thing here. Again, some of in the last year we have 32 captures. Again, for President Morales, it's very important. This is a human issue here, because we have had children that are being sequestered from their homes, taken away, even being given in adoption in other countries. So it's a big problem here of a demand for something, for children, for lives, and unfortunately it's not only a Guatemalan problem, it's a global problem. It's happening all over the place. In Guatemala, we just had a meeting with South Korean intelligence, because they detected a network, of a prostitution network that brings people from all over the world, and they have spas, or prostitution houses disguised as spas, with ladies from all over the world and children from all over the world, the most part. So those are things that we need to work on, in this case as a region, but also in general as a society. Now, counterterrorism. We've been talking about this. For the most part, people have ignored this threat in Guatemala, or in the entire Central American region. We know for a fact that there are active cells, at least in Mexico, in El Salvador and other countries close to Guatemala. In the last year only, we have captured 44 people, most of them Syrians, with fake passports from different nationalities. From Guatemala also, we have found, or at least we have received intelligence from different agencies that they have found Guatemalan passports, real Guatemalan passports, in Syria, in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is a real problem for us as well, because from the anatomical perspective, we're not we can be very similar to them, and God forbid, a Guatemalan passport is found in some cell here in the U.S., it would be catastrophic for our relations, because we would cease to be a trusted partner of the U.S. in the fight against all these threats. We have been very active, as you can see. In the past, we didn't really pay attention to it, but with the assistance of the United States and our partners around Central America, we have captured 44 people that we can talk about, actually. But we keep working at it, and we're detecting more things. And we are actually now just building more trust with all these different countries to make sure that we can actually share that active intelligence. Say we find a weird passport, may it be from Australia, from the United Kingdom, from Italy, from Greece. It doesn't matter, as long as we can quickly find out if it's a legitimate document, travel document. Now, I don't have anything nothing here on my presentation about what I'm about to talk, which is basically political covert influence. It might be a delicate, topic. However, we have been openly discussing it. We have countries like China, Iran, Russia. In this case, I might not agree with everything that has been said here. Russia is actively actually participating in all this political influence in Central America, at least in Guatemala. Maybe not with money, maybe not with active technology, which, well, actually they are doing it with active technology, because now they have this big intelligence base in Cuba, also in Nicaragua, lots of weaponry, Russian weaponry now in Nicaragua as well. But also by using their old proxies from the Cold War, which is that they just hand it over to new handlers. Now, who might be those handlers be? Could it be a specific political ideology? Maybe. Do I want to say a name? Maybe yes, maybe not. It's just a name that holds and owns a lot of media outlets throughout the world. I think you can figure out who it is. And it's really becoming almost a criminal enterprise. Why? Because all these political influence networks are using not only NGO money, at some times also U.S. money through some programs that have been fooled into giving them money, but also from illegitimate sources like cartels, like money laundering schemes. And again, they are trying to subvert democratically elected presidents and governments in trying to find ways to actually establish specific ideologically based and powered governments. And and I will say something, I don't think in my lifetime, at least in my lifetime in Guatemala, I won't see a leftist government being freely elected. And that's one of the things that's going on. The left in Central America and most of South America know that for the next several years they will not be able to win an election because of all the mistakes they've done, all the damage they have done throughout the Western Hemisphere. So they have to find a way to access to power. Now that's a little bit of food for thought I wanted to leave to everybody, which is basically we really need to look into this covert political influence. We, in Guatemala at least, we have networks of, someone said spies, yes, Cuban spies, Venezuelan spies, Nicaraguan spies, working actively in Guatemala, recruiting people, recruiting sources. And, you know, I don't think countries like the United States need to not do anything. I think you really need to do way more than has been done in the past. Because otherwise you will have, if not a Venezuela, definitely, or possibly a Nicaragua just next door. Why? Because you will have a country that is in its geographical and geostrategic position a bottleneck of everything that flows into the United States: people, weapons, drugs. So having a government with those characteristics, I think, would be very, very detrimental to the national security of the United States and all the partners of the United States in the region. I will leave it at that. I'll try not to bore you more. Whenever we're done with the rest of my esteemed colleagues here, any questions you might have for me, gladly take them. Thank you.